first situation we're going to look at is schema objects and security filters that are created within the schema. And what we're going to look at is how that's applied to the users. So in this instance, the user account Gareth can see all records, but any account from the demo accounts will only see records where the region is in the south. And to explain what that looks like, let's go look at the security filter. So inside the schema, we've created a security filter, and that is region in south. It's this very simple approach. And that is applied to the actual user groups. So if we go look at our demo ones and we look at the security filters, what we'll see is for this project, they assign the region as south security filter. So if I was to run this dossier, I'm going to run it now, and this is Gareth logged in, so I am seeing all the data that is available in this data set. Let's now look at what happens if there's another user. So let's just log in again just to show you. So we're going to log in as a separate user. We're going to go to the project. And we'll go to that folder, and we see the same objects as well, but we're going to, when we run the dossier now as this user, we see that they are restricted to only the south region data, which is exactly what the security filter specified it as. For the second scenario, what we're going to look at is importing data and reusing the schema-based security filters within that imported data. So let's go ahead and bring in some external data. I'm going to bring in a CSV file that has supplier data. I'm just going to check it quickly. Yes, this is the data that I want. And what I want to do now is I want to reuse the security filter from the schema. So I'm going to right click on this attribute. I'm going to say map to a project attribute. I'm going to go and find the project attribute, in this case, region. And this is two forms. The first is an ID and a description. So I'm going to choose region ID, and I'm going to choose region as the matching forms for the schema object. I'm going to click submit, and what you'll see is that it actually goes ahead and changes that column to region and has mapped both forms as a multi-attribute form to region as well. I can go ahead and import this data now, and I'm going to bring it into the same folder, and we're going to call this data schema. Save over there. And what I'm going to do now is create a quick dossier on this and just bring in all the data just for the display purposes. And because Gareth is logged in, I'm seeing all the data that's to be expected. Let's go take a look at how the other users will see this. So here we have Johnny logged in. Just make sure we've got everything. Yes, we're seeing the same objects again. We're going to click on that, and Johnny is restricted to south again. And the reason for that is that it is applying the security filter and basically limiting the data to specifically the south region based on what exists in the schema. Our third scenario is situations where you don't have a schema security filter available and potentially you cannot create one. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring in that same data again. So we're importing it from a file. And previously, whereas we would have mapped this to an existing schema object, we don't have that facility to do that right now. I'm still going to go ahead and create it as a multi-form attribute. You don't have to do this. It's just for display purposes. It's a little bit easier to do it this way. Let's save this in the same folder, and we will call this unmapped, just for reference purposes. And what we'll see is that this has brought in the data. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually go in and specify the demo group. And what I'd like to do is apply some security to this group. And based on region, I want this to be south. Click OK. And what I'm going to do is, again, just quickly create a dossier for display purposes. Put all the data in the grid. And as you can see, Gareth is logged in. He can see everything. That is to be expected. And now let's go over to our other users. So we're again at Johnny. Johnny now can see all the same objects. And let's go run the unmapped. And we see again that Johnny has been restricted only to the south region as we expect it to be. So even though we don't have a schema-based object, we can still go ahead and apply a security filter. So the last scenario is a situation where you potentially want to use imported data. You don't have a schema-based object to map to. And what you'd like to do is automate a little bit of the row-level security by using potentially another table through a file or SQL to tell MicroStrategy how to apply that security. And I'm going to start off by bringing in our table again, our supplier table, and going through the same step just for display purposes of mapping this together. Now, I'm going to show you the first one, which is the user login is stored in the table at that time. And what that means is that all you have to do is bring in this exact table. And we'll call this data based on login. And all we need to do now is tell MicroStrategy to look at who's logging in and apply the security based on that. So we're going to come here, we're going to go to the everyone group, we're going to add security, and we're going to say that based on the user login, it should map to whoever is logging into the system at that time. And again, we'll just create a dossier for display purposes. And let's bring in that grid. And I'm going to go ahead and save it. Now, what you'll notice is that it's showing all the data at this point. That's an expected behavior. I'm going to go ahead and log out. I'll log back in myself. And I'm going to go run that same one again. And what you'll see now is that after logging out and logging back in, I'm being restricted to only see the data where my name is in the user login column. And the reason for that is because I applied this to the everyone group, so that applies to me as well, even though I'm an administrator. The same thing with Johnny. Let's go log out of Johnny. And let's log in with Johnny again. We'll open that same dossier. And what we see is that this dossier is now restricted to only where the user login matches the username that's actually logged in. So this is really nice because you can either maintain it, like I said, in a file, or you can maintain it in a SQL table. It means that you can apply different applications to controlling that list of people and to which column they're mapping to. You also get control over mapping, how it's mapped out, because in this instance, it's in the table, but we're actually going to look at a different approach now where it's potentially slightly different to that. So we've looked at the scenario where the user is mapped directly in the table. Let's look at a scenario where they're not. Again, we'll take the file. And in this instance, although I'm going to repeat the first basic step just for display purposes, what I'm actually going to do is take the user login one out so that it's not available. And in order to get this to work, I'm going to add either another file or a SQL table. And what this table is going to do is actually map region to region and still give me the option to display the user login information. So this means that you could map potentially the security table to the region attribute. You could map it to other attributes within there, depending on how you want your security work. So you've got a lot more flexibility because you get to define the table and define what mappings apply at that stage over there. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this in. Again, just let's give it based on login with additional table. The same thing then applies because what we've done is mapped the security table to the actual data that we want to look at. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing again on the everyone group. I'm just going to go to add there and say that the user login must map to whoever is logged in to the actual application. And based on that, we would be able to apply the same thing. So the difference between the two really is in the first instance, you have the user login directly in the table as part of your data. In the second instance, you do not have that user login as part of the data. As you can see, it's two separate tables. And for that, you then have an additional approach of bringing in a table that specifically defines that security for you. So again, just to show you over here, I've created this. Because I've done this live over here, I need to log out and reestablish my session. I'm going to do that quickly. Go select the new one. And what we see here is that I'm seeing all the regions except for South, which is correct. That is what we expect to see in that situation. I'm also only seeing the data from that specific table. I'll show you again. What we're looking at is a specific table of data and not all the tables that were involved. So this demo security table, which currently is a CSV, is the one that's defining the security. And what we're actually looking at from a display perspective is the other table currently. Now, this would then apply again to the everyone group. Just an interesting note on that. You may not want to use the everyone group depending on how you want your administrators and developers to work with the data. You may want them to have more access than other people. What I recommend then is to choose another group that contains a very high level number of users, but does not contain your administrators or your developers, and then apply the security at that group. So let's go to our other screen over here. Let's log out Johnny, and let's bring in another user now, also from that same group. So the same group as Johnny. And what we're going to see here is that once we go to the folder, we're going to go to that specific dossier again. Okay, and here we see that he's not getting any data. Let's go log in as Johnny quickly. And here we see that Johnny is here and he's seen the correct regions. So what it means is that your security table can be defined for specific users, even if they're part of the same group, that you can still define additional security on that. To explain why John Wick could not see any data, whereas Johnny could and I could as well, let's look at the actual security table. So we'll see that in the security table, I've been defined to match those regions. Johnny has been defined to match that specific region, but John Wick has not been defined in the security table. What this means is that even though Johnny and John were in the same group together from a MicroStrategy perspective, we can still apply a further enhanced row-level security outside of what they might have currently had in that group over there. So we can say, yes, you're part of the same group, but you still must have different levels of security applied to you based on the user login that you have and that you've logged in with.